Hi, my dear ones. If you love lesbian stories full of emotion, unexpected encounters, secrets from the past, and loves that dare to challenge everything, then you're in the right place. Before we begin, I have a very special request. Subscribe to the channel now. We're on our journey to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single subscription truly matters, so this space can keep growing and bringing more stories that represent, move, and embrace us. If you can, leave a like and a comment too. It helps the channel reach even more people like you. Now take a deep breath, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about love. It's about difficult choices, painful silences, lingering looks, and a feeling that grows where it was never meant to exist. The story begins now. Natalia Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 47th floor, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars below. At 34, she had built quantum dynamics from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire, but tonight the victory felt hollow. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who had forgotten how to smile without calculation, whose eyes had learned to see people as chess pieces rather than human beings. The cleaning crew always arrived at 9 p.m., after the last ambitious associate had finally surrendered to exhaustion and gone home. Natalia usually left by 8:30, but tonight she had stayed late, haunted by numbers that refused to add up in the quarterly reports. She heard the soft click of the door and turned to see a woman she had never noticed before, pushing a cleaning cart into her office. The woman was perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to hold an entire universe of untold stories. She wore the standard gray uniform of the cleaning company, but there was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet dignity that made Natalia pause. "I'm sorry," the woman said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "I didn't realize anyone was still here. I can come back later." "No, it's fine," Natalia heard herself say, surprising herself with the gentleness in her own voice. "I was just about to leave anyway." But she didn't move. Something about this woman's presence made the sterile office feel less like a prison. The woman smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and began her work with practiced efficiency. Natalia found herself watching as the woman moved through the space, noticing details she had never paid attention to before. The way she carefully straightened the books on the shelf, as if each one mattered. The gentle touch she used when handling the framed photographs on the desk. There was a reverence in her movements, as if she understood that every object held a piece of someone's story. "You're new," Natalia said, breaking the comfortable silence. The woman looked up, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Yes, I started 3 weeks ago. My name is Bianca." She hesitated, then added, "Bianca Torres." There was something vulnerable in the way she offered her name, as if she wasn't used to being asked. "Natalia," the CEO replied, extending her hand. When their fingers touched, Natalia felt a jolt of recognition, as if some part of her soul had been waiting to meet this person. Bianca's hand was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who knew real work, real struggle. It made Natalia suddenly aware of her own soft palms, hands that had never known true hardship. Over the following weeks, Natalia found herself staying later and later, always with some excuse about urgent work that couldn't wait. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. She wanted to see Bianca. She wanted to hear that soft voice that seemed to calm the constant storm in her mind. They began to talk, small conversations at first, about the weather, about the city, about nothing and everything. Bianca had come from a small coastal town, she revealed one evening while dusting the windowsill. Her family had been fishermen for generations, but the sea had been dying, the catches growing smaller each year. She had come to the city with dreams of becoming a teacher, had even completed 3 years of university before her mother fell ill. The medical bills had swallowed her savings, her future, her dreams. Natalia listened with an ache in her chest she couldn't name. She had never stopped to think about the lives of the people who cleaned her office, who served her coffee, who kept the machinery of her success running smoothly in the background. Bianca's story was one of sacrifice and strength, of love that demanded everything and gave nothing back but the knowledge that you had done the right thing. Your mother, Natalia asked gently one night. Is she better now? Bianca's smile was sad and beautiful at the same time. She passed away 8 months ago, but I was there with her at the end, holding her hand. That's what matters. The simple acceptance in her voice, the grace with which she carried her grief, made Natalia feel small and large at the same time. As autumn deepened into winter, their conversations grew longer, more personal. Natalia found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, fears and doubts that lived in the dark corners of her heart. The pressure of being a woman in a man's world, the constant need to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. The loneliness that came with success, the way people looked at her title instead of seeing her. Bianca listened with her whole being, not just her ears. She asked questions that showed she truly understood, that she saw past the armor Natalia had built around herself. You know, Bianca said one evening while organizing the files Natalia had left scattered across her desk, being strong doesn't mean never being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. And you've done that every single day of your life. Those words broke something open in Natalia, some dam that had been holding back years of accumulated emotion. She felt tears prick her eyes, a sensation so foreign she almost didn't recognize it. She hadn't cried since she was 16, since the day her father told her she would never be good enough to run a company. She had proven him wrong, but somewhere along the way, she had lost the ability to feel. It was Bianca who noticed the photograph Natalia kept face down in her desk drawer. One night, while cleaning, she had accidentally knocked it over, and it had fallen face up. The image showed a young Natalia with another girl, both of them laughing with the careless joy of teenagers who still believed the world was kind. Someone important? Bianca asked gently, and Natalia felt her heart contract. My first love, Natalia admitted, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. Sarah. We were 17. My parents found out and sent me to boarding school across the country. I never saw her again. She took the photograph, running her finger over the faded image. I learned then that loving someone could destroy your entire world. So I decided never to love anyone again. Bianca was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes full of understanding and something else, something that made Natalia's breath catch. Love doesn't destroy worlds, Bianca said softly. Fear does. Love builds them, piece by piece, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The wisdom in her words seemed too old for her years, born from experience rather than philosophy. Winter settled over the city like a cold blanket, and Natalia realized with growing alarm that she was looking forward to 9 p.m. more than any board meeting, any merger, any triumph that had once defined her existence. She found excuses to leave things messy, so Bianca would have to spend more time in her office. She brought 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, expensive imported beans that she brewed in the small kitchen down the hall. Bianca accepted the coffee with a smile that made Natalia's carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. They sat together on the leather couch, talking about books and music and dreams that had been deferred but never quite died. Bianca spoke about wanting to go back to school someday, to finish her degree and stand in front of a classroom full of children, shaping young minds the way her favorite teacher had shaped hers. What's stopping you? Natalia asked, though she already knew the answer. Money was always the answer for people like Bianca, people who had to choose between their dreams and their survival. I have student loans from before, Bianca explained, her voice carrying no bitterness, only acceptance. And rent. And my younger brother. He's still in high school back home. I send money when I can. Natalia wanted to write a check, to solve the problem the way she solved everything in her life, with money and power and strategic thinking. But something told her that would be wrong, that it would change the delicate balance between them, would make their relationship transactional when it was the only pure thing in her life. So she stayed silent, but the seed of an idea began to grow in her mind. The company's annual charity gala was approaching, a glittering event where the wealthy pretended to care about the less fortunate for one night, while photographers captured their generosity. Natalia had always hated these events, the false smiles and empty conversations, but this year she found herself thinking about it differently. The foundation gave scholarships to returning students, people who had interrupted their education due to hardship. She mentioned it to Bianca casually one evening, describing the scholarship program as if it were merely an interesting fact, rather than a lifeline she was trying to offer without seeming to offer it. Bianca's eyes lit up with hope, before reality dimmed them again. "I could never get something like that," she said quietly. "There must be hundreds of applicants more deserving than me. Everyone is deserving of a chance to chase their dreams," Natalia replied, more fiercely than she intended. "Everyone, especially people who have already proven they're willing to sacrifice for the people they love." She caught herself, realizing how much emotion had leaked into her voice, how transparent she had become around this woman who saw through all her carefully constructed walls. That night, Natalia couldn't sleep. She lay in her expensive bed in her expensive apartment, surrounded by all the trappings of success, and felt more alone than she had in years. But it was a different kind of loneliness now, not the numb emptiness she had lived with for so long, but an aching awareness of what was missing. She thought about Bianca's smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, the gentle strength in her hands. The realization came slowly, like dawn breaking over a winter landscape. She was falling in love. No, she had already fallen. Somewhere between the first conversation and the shared cups of coffee, between the stories and the silences, her heart had remembered how to feel, and the feeling was terrifying and exhilarating and impossibly complicated, because Bianca cleaned her office, because there was a power imbalance so vast it could swallow any hope of something real between them, because Natalia had built her entire identity on control, and love was the ultimate surrender, because she had sworn never to let anyone that close again, never to give someone the power to destroy her, the way Sarah's loss had destroyed her. But worse than all of that was the growing suspicion that Bianca might feel the same way. It was there in the way her face brightened when Natalia entered the room, in the way her fingers lingered just a moment too long when passing her a cup, in the way she found excuses to stay and talk, even after the cleaning was done. And if Bianca did feel the same way, what right did Natalia have to act on it, given the impossibility of their circumstances? The next evening, Natalia arrived at the office to find a commotion. Security was escorting a man out of the building, his angry voice echoing through the marble lobby. She caught fragments of his shouting, something about corporate greed and stolen opportunities. It wasn't until she reached her floor that she learned the truth. Someone had been leaking confidential information to a rival company. The investigation was swift and thorough. Within days, 3 employees had been questioned and released, but the leak continued. Natalia felt her trust eroding, the paranoia that came with betrayal seeping into every interaction. She stopped staying late, couldn't bear the thought of looking at her colleagues and wondering which one had sold her out. But on the 5th evening, she received an email from her head of security. They had found the source of the leak. Her blood ran cold as she read the name. Bianca Torres had been seen multiple times accessing files she had no authorization to view, photographing documents with her phone. The evidence was damning. Security footage, time-stamped and clear. Natalia felt something break inside her, a pain so sharp it took her breath away. She had been such a fool. The late-night conversations, the shared coffees, the vulnerability she had offered up like a gift. It had all been a lie. Bianca had been using her, gaining her trust to steal from her company. The betrayal was total, complete, devastating. She called an emergency meeting with security and HR. They wanted to involve the police immediately to press charges for corporate espionage and theft. But Natalia surprised herself by hesitating. Despite everything, despite the evidence and the betrayal, some part of her couldn't reconcile the woman who had listened to her fears with someone capable of such calculated deception. "I want to talk to her first," Natalia said, her voice cold and distant, the CEO mask firmly back in place. "Bring her to my office tomorrow evening. Alone. I need to understand why." Her team argued, but she was immovable. She had built an empire by trusting her instincts, and her instincts were screaming that something about this situation wasn't right. The next evening felt like walking to an execution. Natalia arrived at 8, dismissed everyone, and waited. At 9 precisely, the door opened, and Bianca walked in, flanked by 2 security guards. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes meeting Natalia's with a mixture of resignation and something that looked like sorrow. "Leave us," Natalia commanded. The security guards hesitated, but her tone brooked no argument. When the door closed, the silence between them was suffocating. Natalia wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to understand how someone could fake compassion so convincingly. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was a whisper. "Why?" Bianca closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with unshed tears. "Not for the reasons you think," she said quietly. "I was looking for evidence. Evidence that quantum dynamics was involved in bribing government officials in my hometown to approve a factory that's poisoning the water supply. The same water my mother drank for 2 years before she got sick." The world tilted. Natalia gripped the edge of her desk, trying to process what she was hearing. "That's impossible. We don't even have operations in coastal regions. We're a software company." But even as she said it, memories surfaced. A subsidiary they had acquired last year. Manufacturing components. She had approved the purchase but hadn't paid attention to the details. "Helios Manufacturing," Bianca said, and the name hit Natalia like a physical blow. "You bought them 14 months ago. They make the hardware components for your servers, and they've been dumping toxic waste into the Rio de Plata for 3 years. My mother's cancer, 20 other cases in our town, all downstream from their factory." Natalia felt the room spinning. She stumbled to her chair, her mind racing through everything she knew about the Helios acquisition. It had been handled by Marcus Whelan, her VP of Operations, a man she had trusted implicitly. He had assured her the company was clean, all environmental regulations met. But what if he had lied? What if there were things happening in her company that she didn't know about? "Why didn't you just come to me?" Natalia asked, her voice breaking. "Why the deception? If what you're saying is true, I would have investigated immediately." Bianca's laugh was bitter and sad. "Would you? I'm a cleaner, Natalia. Who listens to cleaners? I tried the official channels first. I filed a complaint with your corporate ethics hotline 6 weeks before I took this job. It was dismissed as unsubstantiated. I wrote letters to your board. They were never answered. The truth of it was crushing." Bianca was right. If a cleaning woman had approached her with accusations of corporate malfeasance, would Natalia have taken her seriously? Or would she have dismissed it as the complaint of someone looking for a payout, someone trying to exploit the company's success? She wanted to believe she would have listened, but she couldn't be sure. "So you got a job here," Natalia said slowly. "To find proof yourself." Bianca nodded. "I thought if I could find documentation, something concrete, I could bring it to the media, to environmental groups, to someone who would care. I didn't expect—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I didn't expect to meet you. The real you, not the CEO. I didn't expect to care." The confession hung between them, weighted with everything they had both been trying not to say for weeks. Natalia stood, walking to the window, looking out at the city that had once seemed like a kingdom she had conquered. Now it felt like a labyrinth of moral compromises she hadn't even known she was making. "Show me," she said finally. "Show me everything you found." Bianca hesitated, then pulled a folder from her bag, the kind that cleaning staff wouldn't usually carry. Inside were photographs of documents, emails between Marcus and officials in Bianca's hometown, shipping manifests that showed waste disposal in locations that didn't match the official reports. Natalia read through everything with growing horror. The evidence was clear, damning, and impossible to ignore. Marcus had been bribing local officials to overlook environmental violations. The factory was saving millions in proper disposal costs while poisoning an entire community. And it had all been done under the umbrella of her company, with her name, with her reputation. "I'm going to fix this," Natalia said, her voice steel. "I'm going to shut down those operations, fire everyone involved, and fund a complete environmental cleanup. Your town will have clean water again, and the families affected will be compensated. I swear it on everything I am." She looked at Bianca, seeing the woman clearly for the first time. Not a cleaner, not an enemy, but someone who had sacrificed everything for justice. "And you?" Bianca asked quietly. "What happens to me now?" The question was heavy with unspoken implications. She had committed corporate espionage, technically a crime regardless of her motives. Natalia had every right to press charges, to destroy her as thoroughly as Natalia felt destroyed in this moment. "You go free," Natalia said. "More than that, you become our Director of Environmental Compliance, with full authority to investigate any aspect of our operations. I'll pay for you to finish your degree, and you'll have the power to make sure nothing like this ever happens again in any company I control." She paused, her heart pounding. "If you want it." Bianca stared at her in disbelief. "Why? Why would you do that for me after what I've done?" The vulnerability in her voice, the genuine confusion, told Natalia that despite everything, Bianca's feelings had been real. The connection between them hadn't been a lie, even if it had been built on a foundation of secrets. "Because you were right," Natalia said simply. "Because I've been so focused on building an empire that I forgot to pay attention to what that empire was built on. Because you did what I like to think I would have done in your position. And because—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with your courage, your integrity, your heart." The silence that followed was different than before, charged with possibility rather than tension. Bianca crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of Natalia. "I fell in love with you too," she whispered. "Even though I was so angry at what I thought you represented, even though I tried not to, I fell in love with the woman who stayed late to talk to a cleaner, who listened like my words mattered, who still had a heart hidden under all that armor." Natalia reached out tentatively, and Bianca took her hand. The touch was electric, but also grounding, real in a way nothing else in Natalia's life had been real for a very long time. "This is complicated," Natalia said, needing to acknowledge the massive obstacles between them. "I'm your boss now, or I will be. People will talk. They'll say you slept your way to the position, that I'm showing favoritism." "Let them talk," Bianca replied, with a strength that reminded Natalia why she had fallen in love with this woman in the first place. "I know my worth. I know what I've sacrificed to get here. And I know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with your money or your power. If you offered me everything you have but asked me to compromise my integrity, I would walk away. Can you say the same? It was a test, and a fair one." Natalia thought about it seriously, examining her own heart with brutal honesty. "Yes," she said finally. "I've spent so many years building something I thought mattered, but the only thing that truly matters is being someone worthy of you. And if that means burning down everything I've built and starting over, then that's what I'll do." The investigation that followed was brutal. Marcus Whelan and 3 other executives were fired and faced criminal charges. The factory was shut down for 6 months while Natalia personally oversaw a complete environmental remediation. It cost the company millions, and the stock price took a hit. Board members called for her resignation. Investors threatened lawsuits. But Natalia held firm, backed by evidence that Bianca had meticulously gathered and organized. They worked side by side, Natalia learning to see her company through Bianca's eyes, understanding for the first time the human cost of the decisions made in boardrooms far from where those decisions had their impact. It was the education her business school had never provided. Bianca proved to be brilliant in her new role, bringing a perspective that transformed the company's entire approach to corporate responsibility. She instituted new policies, new checks and balances, new ways of measuring success that included impact on communities and environment. Some days she still wore jeans instead of suits, a quiet rebellion against corporate culture that Natalia secretly loved. They were careful at first, keeping their relationship private, not wanting to give ammunition to those who would question Bianca's qualifications. But slowly, over months, it became impossible to hide the way they looked at each other, the way their hands would brush in meetings, the way Natalia's entire face would soften when Bianca entered a room. The day Bianca moved into Natalia's apartment was 6 months after that confrontation in the office. She brought very little with her, a few boxes of books, some clothes, photographs of her mother. "Is this too fast?" Natalia asked, suddenly nervous in a way boardroom negotiations never made her nervous. "Are we rushing into something we're not ready for?" Bianca laughed, that same warm laugh that had first caught Natalia's attention. "We've been building toward this from the first moment we met. We just didn't know it yet." She took Natalia's face in her hands, those strong, capable hands that had cleaned offices and gathered evidence and now held Natalia's entire heart. I love you. Not your money. Not your power. You. The woman who stays up late worrying about doing the right thing. The woman who chose justice over profit. You. They settled into a life together that was surprisingly ordinary despite their extraordinary circumstances. Bianca enrolled in night classes to finish her degree, studying at the kitchen table while Natalia worked on her laptop. They cooked meals together, argued about movies, took long walks through the city at twilight. Natalia learned to see the world through Bianca's eyes, finding beauty in simple things she had overlooked for years. The company continued to thrive, but differently now. Quantum dynamics became known not just for innovation, but for ethical practices, for environmental leadership, for treating employees as people rather than resources. It attracted a different kind of investor, a different kind of talent. The transformation was slow, but profound, and at the center of it all was the partnership between the CEO who had learned to care and the compliance director who had taught her how. A year later, Natalia stood on the beach in Bianca's hometown, watching the waves roll in clear and clean, the cleanup finally complete. Bianca stood beside her, wearing a simple white dress, her hair loose and dancing in the salt breeze. They had invited everyone from the town to the celebration, a party to commemorate the restoration of their water, their health, their future. Thank you, Bianca whispered, squeezing Natalia's hand, for listening, for believing me, for being brave enough to change everything. Natalia shook her head, emotions too big for words threatening to overwhelm her. You saved me, she said quietly. I was so lost, so disconnected from everything that matters. You reminded me how to be human. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Natalia thought about how far they had both come. From a CEO and a cleaner meeting in an office after hours to partners in life and purpose, rebuilding not just a company but themselves, brick by brick, choice by choice. The journey had been difficult, complicated by power dynamics and public scrutiny, by the scars they both carried from their pasts. But standing there on that beach, surrounded by people who were alive because Bianca had been brave enough to fight, and Natalia had been brave enough to listen, she knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment had been worth it. Love wasn't what she had thought it was when she was 17. It wasn't the desperate, all-consuming passion that had left her broken when it ended. This love was different. It was a choice made every day, in big moments and small ones. It was Bianca's hand in hers, as they faced down hostile board members. It was Natalia making coffee in the morning, just the way Bianca liked it. It was the way they challenged each other to be better, to do better, to never settle for comfort when justice demanded action. They had talked about marriage, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty, but they wanted to wait until they had visited Bianca's mother's grave together, until they could stand at that spot and tell her that her daughter had won, that the water was clean, that her death had not been in vain. That visit was planned for the next morning. That night, they stayed in a small hotel on the beach, the kind of place that smelled like salt and sunscreen and simple happiness. They lay together in the darkness, listening to the waves, and Natalia felt peace settle over her like a blanket. What are you thinking about? Bianca asked softly, her head resting on Natalia's shoulder. I'm thinking about how I almost missed this, Natalia admitted. How I was so afraid of feeling anything that I had built a life where nothing could touch me. And then you walked into my office with a cleaning cart and destroyed all my defenses without even trying. She pressed a kiss to Bianca's forehead. Best thing that ever happened to me. You know what my mother used to say. Bianca's voice was thick with emotion. She said that the heart is like the ocean. You can build walls to keep it contained, but eventually the tide always finds a way through. She was talking about grief at the time, but I think it applies to love too. You can't stop it. You can only choose whether to swim or drown. I choose to swim, Natalia whispered. Every single time I choose to swim. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two women who had found each other against all odds and built something more real than anything Natalia had constructed in her years of building empires. Because this wasn't built on money or power or strategic thinking. It was built on truth, on courage, on the willingness to see each other clearly, flaws and all, and choose each other anyway, on the understanding that love without justice is hollow, but justice without love is cold, on the knowledge that they made each other better, stronger, more complete than they could ever be alone. The next morning, they stood at the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. Bianca knelt by her mother's grave, placing fresh flowers on the stone. "Mama," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "The water is clean now. The people are safe, and I found someone who helped me do it. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and loves me anyway. Someone who taught me that power doesn't have to corrupt, that wealth doesn't have to blind, that even people who seem unreachable can change." Natalia knelt beside her, placing her own hand on the grave marker. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking, "for raising someone with the courage to fight for what's right, even when it seemed impossible. Thank you for teaching her that love is worth sacrificing for, but that it should never require you to sacrifice yourself. I promise to honor your daughter, to support her, to stand beside her in every battle she chooses to fight." They stayed there for a long time, as the morning sun climbed higher and the town below began to wake. When they finally stood, Bianca took Natalia's hand and led her to the edge of the cemetery, where you could see the entire valley spread out below. The river that ran through it sparkled in the sunlight, clean and pure and full of life again. "This is just the beginning," Bianca said, her voice steady and strong. "There are so many places like this, so many communities being hurt by companies that value profit over people, so much work still to do." She turned to Natalia, her dark eyes serious. "Are you ready for that? For a lifetime of fighting these battles together?" Natalia smiled, the kind of genuine smile she had thought she had lost forever until Bianca had taught her how to feel again. "I was made ready the night you walked into my office," she said. "I just didn't know it yet. You've given me a purpose beyond profit, a reason to use my power for something that matters. I can't think of anything I'd rather spend my life doing than fighting beside you." They walked back down the hill hand in hand, toward the town where Bianca had grown up, where Natalia had learned what her success really cost. Children played in the streets now, splashing in puddles without fear. Mothers hung laundry on lines, the water they used no longer carrying poison. Old men sat on porches, looking at the river with hope instead of resignation. It was a small town, easy to overlook in the grand scheme of global business. But standing there, seeing the direct impact of their choices, Natalia understood something she had never grasped in all her years of success. This was what power was for. Not to accumulate more power, not to build monuments to ego, but to make places like this possible. To give people like Bianca the tools to fight for their communities. That evening they sat on the beach where they had celebrated the day before, watching another sunset paint the sky. "When we get married," Bianca said thoughtfully, "I want to do it here, on this beach, so everyone can see that good things are possible, that justice and love can exist together, that you don't have to choose between fighting for what's right and building a life worth living." "Anything you want," Natalia replied, and she meant it. She had learned that real strength wasn't about control or domination. It was about flexibility, about adaptation, about being willing to change your entire worldview when confronted with truth. Bianca had taught her that, not through arguments or demands, but simply by being exactly who she was. They talked late into the night about their plans, both personal and professional. Bianca would finish her degree, then perhaps get a master's in environmental science. Natalia would use her influence to create a coalition of ethical companies, businesses committed to profiting without destroying. They would buy a small house by the ocean, somewhere Bianca could hear the waves she had grown up with, somewhere Natalia could remember that there was a world beyond boardrooms and bottom lines. But more than any of those concrete plans, they committed to something simpler and more profound. They committed to seeing each other, really seeing each other, every day. To never letting power or success or the daily grind of life make them forget why they had come together in the first place. To choosing each other, again and again, in the face of all the pressures that would try to pull them apart. As the moon rose over the ocean, casting silver light across the water, Natalia pulled Bianca close and felt a completeness she had never experienced before. She had spent so many years building herself into someone formidable, someone untouchable, someone who didn't need anyone, and in doing so, she had almost missed the greatest achievement of her life, because loving Bianca, being loved by Bianca, required more courage than any business deal she had ever negotiated. It required vulnerability, trust, the willingness to be wrong and to change. It required her to dismantle all the walls she had built and stand exposed, knowing that Bianca could hurt her in ways no competitor ever could, and then trusting that she wouldn't, that they would build something together stronger than any fortress of isolation. "I love you," Natalia whispered into the darkness, the word still feeling new on her tongue, still carrying the weight of miracle. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You've changed everything about my life, about who I am, about what I think matters. And I would do it all again. Every painful moment, every difficult choice, just to end up right here, right now, with you." Bianca turned in her arms, her face illuminated by moonlight, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards, and everything to do with the soul that shone through her eyes. "We found each other," she said simply. "Against all the odds, across all the barriers that should have kept us apart. The CEO and the cleaner, the powerful and the powerless, except neither of us was really what we seemed, were we?" "No," Natalia agreed. "You were never powerless. You were the strongest person in every room, including mine, and I was never really powerful. I was just scared and hiding behind success." She smiled, feeling tears gather in her eyes, happy tears that she no longer tried to hold back. "You taught me the difference between power and strength, and you taught me that the greatest act of courage is allowing yourself to be loved." They stayed on that beach until dawn began to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, and as the new day broke over the ocean, over the town that had been saved, over two women who had found in each other something more valuable than any empire, Natalia Chen felt something she had never felt before in her entire life. She felt whole, complete, home, not in a place, but in a person, not in achievement, but in connection, not in control, but in the beautiful, terrifying freedom of loving and being loved, without conditions or calculations. Bianca had come into her life like a storm, disguised as a cleaner, but really an avenging angel, seeking justice and finding love instead, or perhaps finding both, because maybe they had always been the same thing. And Natalia, who had thought she had everything and discovered she had nothing that mattered, who had built a kingdom and found it empty, who had sworn never to love again and then broken that vow in the best possible way, finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her years ago. Success without love is just a beautiful prison, but love without purpose is equally empty. The secret, the thing she had been seeking all her life without knowing it, was finding both, together, in the arms of a woman who had dared to challenge her, to see through her, to love her anyway. 3 years passed like water flowing downstream, carrying them forward into a future neither could have imagined that first night in the office. Quantum dynamics became a model for ethical business practices, winning awards not for profit margins but for community impact. Bianca completed her master's degree and became one of the most respected voices in corporate environmental responsibility, speaking at conferences around the world. But the moments Natalia treasured most were the quiet ones. Sunday mornings in their beach house, drinking coffee on the porch while seagulls cried overhead, evenings spent grading papers together, Bianca having finally achieved her dream of teaching part-time at the local university. Walks along the shore where they had first celebrated the town's restoration, their footprints washing away with each wave, temporary but real. They married on a spring afternoon on that same beach, with the entire town as witnesses. Bianca wore a dress the color of ocean foam, and Natalia wore a suit the color of sand at sunset. There were no elaborate decorations, no expensive catering, just tables laden with food prepared by neighbors, children running barefoot in the sand, and music that mixed with the sound of waves. When they exchanged vows, Natalia spoke from her heart without notes or preparation. "You walked into my life when I had forgotten how to be human," she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "You showed me that real power isn't about control, but about service. That real wealth isn't measured in money, but in lives touched and communities healed. You gave me back my soul, and I promised to spend every day of my life being worthy of that gift." Bianca's vows were simpler, but no less profound. "I came looking for justice, and found love instead. Or maybe I found that they were always the same thing, waiting to be discovered together. You took my anger and helped me transform it into hope. You took my pain and helped me transform it into purpose. I promise to stand beside you in every battle, to challenge you when you need it, to support you always, and to love you with everything I am." The celebration lasted until the stars came out, and even then, people lingered, reluctant to let the magic of the day end. Natalia danced with Bianca under the moonlight, swaying to music played by local musicians, surrounded by people who had once been victims of her company's negligence, and were now family. The journey from that reality to this one had transformed everyone it touched. In the years that followed, they built something unprecedented, a consulting firm that helped other companies transition to ethical practices. Bianca led the environmental and social impact teams, while Natalia used her business acumen to show that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. They were invited to speak at Harvard, at Stanford, at international summits on sustainable business. But they never forgot where they started. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, they returned to the 47th floor office where it all began. It belonged to someone else now, but the building manager always let them in for a few minutes. They would stand by those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, remembering the lonely CEO and the determined cleaner who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. "Do you ever regret it?" Bianca asked one such anniversary, her hand in Natalia's. "Walking away from pure business to do this work? You could have been so much wealthier, so much more powerful in the traditional sense." Natalia smiled, pulling her wife close. "I have everything that matters. I have you. I have purpose. I have a life that makes sense. What more could I possibly want?" They adopted 2 children, siblings from Bianca's hometown whose parents had died young. Maria was 8 and Lucas was 5, both bright and curious, and full of the resilience that came from surviving hardship. Natalia learned to braid hair and kiss scraped knees, to read bedtime stories and attend school plays. She discovered that the fiercest negotiations she would ever face were with a determined 8-year-old who wanted to stay up past bedtime. Bianca flourished as a mother, patient and wise, teaching the children about the ocean and the environment, about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. She showed them how to be strong without being cruel, how to fight without losing compassion. And together, she and Natalia gave them something neither had received enough of in their own childhoods: unconditional love, and the freedom to be exactly who they were. On Maria's 10th birthday, they threw a party on the beach. As Natalia watched her daughter laugh with friends, splashing in the clean water that Bianca had fought so hard to restore, she felt the circle complete itself. This child would grow up knowing that one person could make a difference, that justice was possible, that love came in many forms, and all of them were valid and beautiful. That night, after the children were asleep, Natalia and Bianca sat on their porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cool evening air. "Thank you," Natalia whispered, though she wasn't sure exactly what she was thanking Bianca for. For everything, perhaps. For being brave enough to fight. For being open enough to love. For seeing past the armor to the frightened woman underneath, and loving her anyway. "Thank you," Bianca replied, understanding without explanation. "For listening when you could have dismissed me. For changing when you could have stayed rigid. For loving me not despite who I am, but because of it. For giving me the tools to fight bigger battles than I ever could have fought alone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon paint a silver path across the dark water. Somewhere in the house, Lucas called out in his sleep, and Natalia rose to check on him, a gesture so natural now she didn't even think about it. She tucked the blanket around his small form, kissed his forehead, and returned to her wife's waiting arms. "This is everything," Natalia said softly. and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Not the money, though they had enough. Not the fame, though their work was recognized globally. Not the awards or accolades or speaking engagements. But this. The sound of the ocean. The warmth of Bianca beside her. The children sleeping safely in their beds. The knowledge that tomorrow they would wake up and continue the work of making the world a little bit better. Years continued to unfold, bringing challenges and triumphs in equal measure. There were companies that refused to change, battles they lost, setbacks that felt devastating in the moment. But through it all, they had each other. When Natalia grew discouraged, Bianca reminded her of the town that had clean water now, the children who wouldn't get sick, the future they had literally saved. When Bianca felt overwhelmed, Natalia reminded her that she didn't have to carry every burden alone, that partnership meant sharing the weight. They taught their children about their story, age appropriately but honestly, about how Bianca had been a cleaner seeking justice, and Natalia had been a CEO who needed to learn what really mattered, about how love could bridge any divide if both people were brave enough to be vulnerable, about how doing the right thing was often hard, but always worth it. Maria grew up to study environmental law, determined to fight the same battles her mothers had fought but armed with legal knowledge and their example. Lucas became a teacher, following in Bianca's footsteps, wanting to shape young minds the way his mother's had shaped his. Watching them find their own paths, their own purposes, was perhaps the greatest success Natalia ever achieved. On their 20th anniversary, they renewed their vows on the same beach where they had married. Maria and Lucas stood beside them now, young adults with their own dreams and convictions. The town had grown and prospered, transformed from a dying fishing village into a thriving community, known for its environmental stewardship and sustainable practices. 20 years ago, Natalia said, speaking to the gathered crowd, I thought I knew what success looked like. I measured it in money and power and quarterly reports. Then I met a woman with a cleaning cart and eyes full of determination, and she taught me that real success is measured in lives changed, in justice served, in love given and received without conditions. Bianca squeezed her hand, tears streaming down her face. 20 years ago, I was so angry. I thought the world was divided into the powerful and the powerless, the exploiters and the exploited. Then I met a woman who proved that people can change, that systems can be reformed, that even those with everything can choose to use their power for good. She taught me that love doesn't make you weak, it makes you invincible. That night, lying in bed in the beach house that had become their sanctuary, Natalia thought about the long journey from that first meeting to this moment. Every choice, every challenge, every moment of doubt had led them here. To this life they had built together, brick by brick, decision by decision, day by day. What are you thinking about? Bianca asked, the same question she had asked so many times over the years. And Natalia gave the same answer she always gave, the truest one. I'm thinking about how lucky I am. How close I came to missing all of this because I was too afraid to feel, too guarded to love, too focused on the wrong things to see what really mattered. We found each other, Bianca said, a statement that contained their entire story. Despite everything that should have kept us apart, the universe conspired to put a cleaner in a CEO's office after hours, to give us time to talk, to let us see each other. And we were both brave enough to grab hold of that chance with both hands and never let go. Natalia pulled her wife closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart. 20 years. And it still felt like a miracle every single morning when she woke up beside her. I love you, she whispered, more now than ever. You've given me everything that matters. Purpose, family, a life worth living. You've made me better than I ever could have been alone. We made each other better. Bianca corrected gently. That's what love does when it's real. It doesn't complete you. You were already complete. It challenges you to grow, to change, to become the best version of yourself. And then it stands beside you while you do the terrifying work of actually becoming that person. As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms in a house filled with love and purpose and the sound of the ocean that had witnessed their journey, Natalia's last thought was one of profound gratitude, not to fate or destiny or chance, but to Bianca for being brave enough to fight for justice even when it seemed impossible, to herself for being open enough to change when confronted with truth, to both of them for choosing love even when it was complicated and difficult and required them to risk everything. Because in the end, that was what love always required. Everything. Every pretense dropped. Every wall dismantled. Every fear faced. Every comfortable lie abandoned in favor of uncomfortable truth. It required you to be seen completely, vulnerability and strength and everything in between. And then it required you to see your partner just as completely, and to love them anyway, not despite their flaws, but as a complete person who was exactly who they were supposed to be. The CEO who had been lost in her own empire and the cleaner who had been searching for justice had found something neither expected. A partner who made them whole not by filling a void, but by challenging them to become complete themselves. Together, they had built a life that honored both their values, a love that was both fierce and gentle, a partnership that changed not just their own lives, but rippled outward, touching countless others. And every night, as the ocean sang its eternal song outside their window, they fell asleep, knowing that tomorrow they would wake up and choose each other again, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, not because it was easy, but because it was real, not because they were perfect, but because they were perfectly themselves with each other, and that was more than enough. It was everything. The story of the CEO and the cleaner became legend in business schools and ethics classes, a modern parable about power and responsibility and the transformative nature of love. But for Natalia and Bianca, it was simply their life, complicated and beautiful, challenging and rewarding, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. It was the story of two women who found each other in the most unlikely of places and built something that would outlast them both, not just a business or a legacy, but a new way of understanding what it meant to be successful, to be powerful, to be truly, completely, courageously alive.